Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of In the Eyes of Truth. Today we've got a special guest, Pascal Lottaz. He is the founder of Neutrality Studies. If you don't know about Neutrality Studies, I found Neutrality Studies about a year and a half ago. If you don't know about the show, look it up on YouTube. Very interesting guests. Covers covers everything wrong in the world these days, which is a lot. Pascal, welcome.
Hey there, entrepreneurs. Are you feeling the squeeze from increasing regulations and higher taxes? Maybe you've noticed the growing instability and thought there has to be a better way. Well, you're not alone, and that's exactly why you need to consider offshoring your wealth now. Imagine a life where your hard-earned money isn't constantly under threat from unpredictable government policies. Sounds pretty good, right? Let me tell you. It's not just a dream, it's a smart strategy. Here at Exit Strategy, we specialize in helping entrepreneurs like you protect and grow their wealth. We navigate the complex world of international finance so you don't have to, from setting up offshore accounts to advising on the best countries with favorable tax laws. We've got you covered. Now, I know what you're thinking. Offshoring sounds risky, maybe even a bit shady, but the truth is many savvy business owners are already doing it. It's not just about dodging taxes, it's about creating a safety net for your future. Imagine diversifying your assets across multiple jurisdictions. When one country faces economic downturns, your wealth remains secure. Think of it as an insurance policy against the uncertainties of life. And let's not forget, having a portion of your wealth offshore can open up opportunities for international investments. You're no longer limited by the economic climate of a single country. You can tap into booming markets around the world, maximizing your returns. But here's the kicker. Time is of the essence. With increasing global scrutiny and tightening regulations, the window for easy offshoring is closing fast. The sooner you act, the better positioned you'll be. So why wait? Protect your wealth, secure your future, and explore new opportunities with Exit Strategy. Don't let the rising dangers in the US economy catch you off guard. Reach out to us today and take the first step towards financial freedom. Because when it comes to your wealth, playing it safe is the riskiest move of all. Thanks for watching, and remember, your future starts with the decisions you make today. Choose wisely, choose Exit Strategy. Catch you in the next video.
Tell us, tell the audience some more about yourself, if you will, and about neutrality studies.
Stanislav, thank you very much for having me on your show and for the kind words. Yeah, you already introduced the most important thing, which is that I run this YouTube channel on neutrality studies, which is where I interview people and I ask them my honest questions about world politics and why certain things are happening and others not, and how they view developments in the international realm. Because seriously, I sometimes just lack the capacity to think about all of this, all of the reasons why some of these atrocities are happening that we are seeing. I mean, I started my channel about in earnest, in honest, like about 3 years ago. Before that, I used it as a place to put my webinars. I'm an academic. I work at Kyoto University. Before I was at Waseda University, and I research neutral countries and neutral actors in international relations. And before three years ago, I used my YouTube channel to put webinars that I hosted with other academics there. And then I figured out that these webinars cost a lot of time and effort, and they render nice discussions, but that's it. So I decided, how about I just do one-on-one with people, and I just reach out to them and interview them. And coincidentally, I started doing that in very early February 2022. And coincidentally, the first person I did that to, because I just wanted to know what he had to say, was Ambassador Jack Matlock. I
Oh,
just reached out to him and said, like, hey, I have a YouTube channel. Would you want to talk to me? And he said yes. He didn't check that I had what was that, like 30 or 40 subscribers. But he just came online, and then we had a good talk. And then I put that online. At the time we talked about the Ukraine crisis, because back then it was still a crisis,
right,
and
right.
because the SMO hadn't started yet. Yeah, and after that, I figured out I can just repeat this and approach people and ask them my questions. So I do 1 hour kind of podcast interviews similar to what we are doing here. and pick people's brains, and sometimes some special shows about certain topics, mainly international relations. Sometimes we venture a little bit into economics and a couple of theories. I use the channel to basically experiment with different formats, but that's how it's a little bit different from, like, let's say, wonderful shows like the Duran that you've been on as well, and so on, that try to cover daily
Hmm.
political developments. I sometimes I do political developments, but I often do kind of a little bit more academic discussions about it.
Well, it's very important. Yeah, I do the daily. I don't do it daily. I do it once every couple of days. But I do enjoy the discussions with people in different areas, getting information from them from their viewpoints. Because my viewpoint is my viewpoint, and it's limited like everybody else's viewpoint. So tell me though, on the first interview, because I didn't, like I said, I picked up on your channel about a year and a half ago. What were they saying about the crisis at that point?
The most interesting thing Chuck Matlock said, that I also then, I keep repeating to people, is that he said, like, NATO expansion was a mistake. He- in February, and he said, like, look, we have this crisis now, and we have this deep problem that is ongoing, and is this saber rattling on all sides. We have that because NATO went all the way to the borders, and because the NATO leadership is not willing, and the United States is not willing to say, like, okay, we will stop this. We will not make Ukraine a member. And he was talking about all of the things that people like us have now been exploring for 3 years, and this entire provocation. The thing he said, and I also believed at the time, was he didn't believe that Russia would actually start a military operation. He and me, we both, together with a couple of other people like Anatol Lieven and so on, we were of the firm belief that a Russo-Ukrainian war would be way too hurtful to Russia, because you basically attack this brotherly nation, and which is not just a brotherly nation. I mean, you attack people who have, like, family in both sides, right?
Yeah.
It is utterly clear that this is, like, as we discussed right before the recording, right? Everybody, so far I haven't met a Russian who didn't really have either family or friends in Ukraine. So that this is utterly hurtful and is more like a civil war, that I think Jack Matlock and me too, we both thought that this is what would ultimately also prevent large-scale bloodshed. Now, after the attack, I wrote an email with Jack Matlock, and he said, like, well, I was wrong, obviously. And ever since then, we tried to understand, what happened, and how it is possible that this could not be de-escalated. And my own naive I was naive, and it was very naive looking back at that, because I always thought that, neutrality for Ukraine is the obvious way out. So it's just a
Yeah.
matter of making it more obvious, right? Of talking about it. And we have all of these academics who wrote books about it for a long time, and I've been looking at that through this neutrality lens ever since 2017. It's utterly obvious. So the fact that it doesn't happen must be because people don't understand it. And by now we know, no, they understood it, and they proactively prevented it from happening. Not only before the SMO, but also after the SMO
Yes.
started, and we've had it. We have neutrality in that goddamn agreement, and by now I can even trace it. In 2021, do you remember in December in the
Of
draft
course.
treaties?
Yes, of course.
Russia didn't use the word neutrality in those draft treaties. It wasn't there, but it was all but implied. It was described, and I interpreted that as Russia trying not to dirty the word, right? You try not to make the policy obvious, because then you would give ammunition to the others. And then all of that failed. And then in March and April, they actually put the word into the goddamn documents, because they said, like, well, we already have the bloodshed, so let's make it clear. And still, even then, the West managed to undermine and pull the Ukrainians away from the brink of peace. They were at the brink of
Oh yeah,
peace,
yeah.
and the West pulled them away. So the only conclusion left at this point is that this is a deliberate policy to prevent neutrality from actually pacifying a conflict the way that it is obvious to any awake observer.
For Russians, I'll tell you straight up, even though people have hardened quite a bit because of the atrocities done to Russian POWs, to civilians. I mean, castrations, mutilations. You get guys back that are they have swastikas carved into their backs and their chests and their foreheads. And and this is nothing new. This has been going on since 2014, just on a larger scale now. But for most Russians, this is a civil war. For the Ukrainians, particularly the Western Ukrainians, it's not. But Russians view it as a civil war because Central and Eastern Ukrainians are, I've got lots of family. Everybody, just about everyone I know has family there. And a lot of those family members are very brainwashed. And it's very effective brainwashing.
I absolutely believe that. But then again, look, the war, that's what this logic of warfare does, right? If you want to, if nations fight each other, and then what you have going on is a continuous radicalization, usually in both sides, but usually one side more than the other, because otherwise, one side would at some point come around, and you will get to to some form of negotiations. So you need to radicalize. You can see that in Israel, right? You can see
Hmm.
how the Israeli population has largely been brainwashed into
Oh, yeah.
believing that they're the victims and need to go and exterminate the Palestinians, right? This is now obvious to the world, but it is not obvious to the people to whom this has been done. So it will take us many, many years to figure out the different levels of guilt in this huge crime and conflagration of different crimes. Also, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, it's horrible because it's what I call the logic of war and warfare, that it is also a spiral, and that then also helps both sides, because sadly enough, on both sides of violence, you usually have people who want to continue solving the problem with violence, and you have people who want to solve to use other methods of solving the problem. And the strange thing is that the West keeps portraying Vladimir Putin as Hitler, who wants to eradicate everybody, when in fact Vladimir Putin is one of the people who tries to do this, tried for the longest time to do this without violence. So it's an utterly skewed way of looking at the different political actors, and Europe itself is self-brainwashed at the moment, which is why it can't figure out what is actually going on.
I think the psychological term for this is projection. Uh, the West is projecting its own psychosis onto Russia. If you look at the way Russia fights, if we were like the West in 1945, we would have exterminated Germany outright. We would have exterminated the entire German population, and nobody would have said a word at that point. Of the 6 million dead German civilians, 5 million were killed by U.S. UK firebombing of every single German city. And in 1945, as the first day of the Battle of Berlin, the neighborhoods that were already taken, there's still occasional fire going on. The Red Army turned around soup kitchens. For the civilians, some of them were just shooting at the Red Army. So, but that's always been the way the Russian army's fought. We've never exterminated anybody. We have all the minorities that ever lived in Russia still live in Russia. Some of them died out because they either intermixed or, just not enough birth rates because they're really small people. But everybody else, I mean, they still have their own languages, they still have their own culture.
Yeah, and like the largest crimes of Stalin were actually perpetrated against his own people. The persecution and of minority, not well, some minorities, and the persecution of military personnel, right,
Yeah.
and the purges and so on. Those were done against Russians and people in the Soviet Union. Now there are legitimate grievances, historical grievances by Ukrainians and by Georgians and so on, who suffered under communist rule. There were crimes committed, but in terms of war fighting, I believe you're absolutely right. And I just yesterday, I actually compared the numbers of civilian casualties that by now, I mean, until between February 2022 and April 2025, the official monitor, I think monitored by, I forgot which one. It's an external, it's the UN body. The official numbers are 13,000 civilian casualties, 1-3. So 13,000 civilian casualties, and about 80% of those on the side of the Ukrainians. And if we divide that by the number of months, then we get to around 250, 260 civilian casualties per month. If we look at the bombing of Yugoslavia, of the NATO war against Yugoslavia, the 3 months, we are at around 170, 175 civilian casualties per month. If we look at at Gaza, at the genocide, we are at around 2,200 civilian casualties per month. So the way that Russia and Ukraine are fighting this war are very akin to the way that NATO is fighting its war. I mean, these are wars among nation states. When we look at what Israel is doing, it's obviously on a different scale. But I just also say that in order to say, like, the number of collateral damage that we are seeing is very akin to what NATO tells us was normal and was to be expected in Yugoslavia. It was unfortunate. How NATO says, like, they're just
Oh
protecting
yeah,
people,
yeah.
right? They went there to protect people. They bombed Serbia to protect people, and that is utter BS. Of course, it's BS. I just want to say, like, we're still in the realm of that kind of type of warfare. For as horrible as it is absolutely horrible. And I don't want to relativize anything. I just want to put it into perspective of the kind of warfare that we have seen before, because some people keep saying the Russians are trying to pull a genocide or exterminate the Ukrainians. No, no, they're not. They never tried. That's not what's going on. What's going on is a horrible international armed conflict that should be brought to an end as soon as possible. But in my view, the West is utterly has been cheering this on and egging it on, and actually been running parts of it, as we
Oh
know,
yeah.
large parts of it, from Germany to the United States. It's a very weird thing. So some people, I mean, it's probably okay, right, to look at it as a proxy war, although I recently come to call it an implementation war, because I do think the core of the conflict is between the United States and Russia, and it is fought out, implemented through Ukraine, and that's part of the crime that we are seeing.
A coalition war is also a good term for it, because it really is a coalition.
Coalition war.
Now, to make things worse on your statistics, when they say Ukrainian, they count in that everybody in the Eastern territories that are now part of Russia as Ukrainian. So when you count, like I said, like I was telling you, I've got relatives that have been under fire for 12 years in Donetsk Republic and Lugansk Republic. And right now, if you look in Zaporozhye and those areas, they're having drone attacks on civilians. They do that. They'll take a drone up. They're looking for a military target. Batteries running low. Wow. Okay, no military targets. But look, there's a car full of women and children. That's good enough too, because that drone's not coming back. So they just look for whatever target they can find after that. So it's much
Except
worse. It's a horrible. Pardon my language. It's a horrible shit show.
it's utterly disgusting. And again, this is just a thing that these militaries do. Because there's utter disregard for human life, right? Once the slaughter really starts. This
Mhm.
is what the Americans were doing in Cambodia, in Vietnam. If they couldn't find the right places, the Ho Chi Minh Trail to bomb, they just uh, uh, emptied their payloads over some villages, because you hit something, and something's going to come out of it, right? Even, I mean, who cares about the peasants there dying? At some point, the war dehumanizes its participants psychologically so much that they then do this indiscriminate stuff, which also under international law is of course forbidden. And every single manual from Russia to the United States, I mean, military manual forbids this kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
it will still happen because of the psychological way that wars then shape the people who fight them. And that's why the crime to me is usually letting this going on. It's on a political level, while of course the people who perpetrate this also they're skilled on their part as well, and there's sick bastards who enjoy this.
Oh
Uh,
yes.
um,
Yes.
And those are the people who then get promoted.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, U.S. Army has a very big problem with that. The generals that get promoted are politicians. They one star, you can still get some decent generals. I knew two in my career. I knew two decent generals, Hardin and Griffin. God rest his soul. Griffin passed away last December. But other than that, they were all politicians. That's how they know which butt to kiss. They know what the master wants to hear, and that's how they get promoted.
Yeah, and then they go as far as delivering the wrong information, which in order
Absolutely.
to please the political leadership. And this is why I'm worried right now about Iran, because what we're hearing is that the US is actually withdrawing now some of its forces from the Middle East and non-military personnel from Baghdad and other stations, and this is very very worrisome because we don't know what these four-star generals have already told Donald Trump and the three stars and so on, who are preparing and who constantly overestimate the firepower of the US and what it can do, and we've seen it fail time and again, but because the US, whenever the US loses a war, it usually loses the war abroad. And,
Yeah.
it's humiliated, like in Afghanistan, but it never actually has, New York going up in flames or San Francisco being bombed out. So the damage, the direct damage at the US is too small to deter it from actually going into a next adventure. People then look at this as an adventure because it's so far abroad. And I'm very, very worried about the Middle East again right now.
Well, the American cities do burn. They just don't burn from the wars that they start. They burn from for other reasons, like LA at the moment. Yeah, you're
True.
absolutely right. And I'll tell you, I for Russia, but something I don't think the U.S. is taking into account. Uh, Colonel McGregor's mentioned it a couple times, and I'll put a little more meat on it than he does. For Russia, Iran is an existential crisis, just a little less than Ukraine. Because if Iran falls, the next to go is going to be the Caucasus and Central Asia, and that's the underbelly. It used to be the underbelly of the Soviet Union. It's still the underbelly of Russia. It's a gigantic border. I mean, the Russian border with Kazakhstan is like 3,500 kilometers. And Georgia's just now stabilized, where the government's stabilized. It's not going to be a second front, so it's not going to be a bigger war. But if Iran falls, and that's how the Russian strategists are looking at it. There's no way we're letting Iran fall.
Yeah, and look, Russia would be really dumb to do that. I mean, as long as you can support Iran, especially if you don't have to fight yourself. Again, I mean, it's even kind of a payback, as sick as it might sound, and I don't think that this would be the motivating factor. But I mean, obviously, if you think about it from the whole alliance perspective, then
Hmm.
Russia then supporting at least with intelligence and sharing and the military equipment, Iran is the most logical thing to happen. So
Yes.
this could be another Ukraine, and it's utterly horrible. And I hope this is not what's happening. I hope this is not what's going on. But at this point, Israel is such a what do you call that? An arsonist, basically setting fire everywhere. That I wouldn't be surprised if they. I mean, not be surprised. As in, they said so. That's what they want, right? That's the
Yeah,
official
yeah.
policy of the state. They want the war, but they want the war fought through the United States. So in a sick sense, they're trying to do the opposite of what the U.S. did to Ukraine. Israel is trying to fight a war through the U.S. with Iran, and it's sick. But this is how some of these people think.
No,
And let's face it, at the
absolutely.
moment, Israel is actually with its back to the wall because they're at least in Europe, they're now losing the propaganda battle, and I think they've understood that. The Madeleine has kind of driven this point home, I believe.
They've lost the propaganda battle in Russia. I mean, they for the most part, there's some that still support them, but they've lost it. And I'm not talking about amongst Russian Muslims. They're around 10%, 9% of the population. I'm talking about amongst the Orthodox Christians as a majority. Well, let me ask you this, because what we've seen with Israel, and nobody's commenting this, but what we've seen with Israel, we've had the Minister of Finance flat out state it, and lots of soldiers wear the patch, is the river to the river, Euphrates to the Nile, Greater Israel. And it seems that quite a bit of that is the motivating factor in the political move. Has anybody mentioned that? Has anybody expanded on that?
I have seen people mentioning it. I mean, that Greater Israel is obviously the motivating factor behind this. So not just the annexation of Gaza and the West Bank, but it is whether Israel. I mean, Israel already shows that it wants to go beyond this border, right? With the Golan Heights and with the territories that it now occupies in Syria and the Lebanon that it
Yeah.
occupied in past, then withdrew, and now is occupying again. So the question is, does it do that in order to do as Netanyahu says, have corridors like a buffer zone? Because when Israel does this, it's fine, right? If
Yeah,
Russia says
of
buffer
course,
zone,
of
then it's a
course.
breach of international law. If Israel says it, it's of course it's fine, right? You need that. And also, if Israel needs to bomb like civilian infrastructure abroad or needs to bomb, Damascus airport time and again, then that's natural. I mean, that's
Of
just some
course.
of the bad things that happen. It's so frustrating, but I do think that Israel is in at least a large part of its society is in a mindset of nation building, right? They are in the midst of like let's compare to the United States with the mid 19th century and manifest destiny. The West is where we need to go. We know that we need territory from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and I think this is comparable to the mindset that the Israelis or a large part of the Israeli society is in. This is also why to most of them, it's probably obvious that they need the West Bank and that the problem of the Palestinians needs to be taken care of one way or the other. Because in their perception, also what happened on October 7 is just proof that you need to get rid of this problem. And while you're doing that, you also form the land at the way it is imagined by some of these extremist fundamentalists, because that's what they are. They're not even like many of them not even believing practicing like Orthodox Jews or
Oh
something
yeah.
like that. It's just it's a belief in the sacred the sacred status of Israel, right, among the peoples of the earth, and unfortunately, a lot of them are running the country.
Yeah, they seem to root it in religion, but a lot of them aren't that religious, which is true. As opposed to say the Nazis, they didn't root it in religion; they just rooted it in racial theory, which was I guess
Yeah,
more
but you
if
need a
also
dogma,
was
and
easier. Mhm.
the early Zionists were all non-religious, right?
Right,
Herzl
right.
and so on. But it is a dogma, right? So it's there's this weird interplay between religion and dogma, and the weird way in which it has become married also in the Western discourse and weaponized, right? Of equating Zionism with anti-Zionism with Semitism and so on. So it's a really weird play on these different concepts, but at the end of the day, it goes back to very, very strong racist dogmas and a colonial enterprise, in my view.
Have you seen anything or anybody mention any of the Western involvement in the Pakistani-Indian conflict? And the reason I'm saying this, if you look at the moves that Russia has made, Russia signed an agreement with Afghanistan for the transfer of natural gas by truck, so far by truck, but LNG. Today it's a trucking route. Tomorrow it's a pipeline. Right now it's going
Mhm.
to Iran and then to Pakistan. I mean, I'm sorry, to India, the end consumer. But Pakistan was making a lot of noises. They want to join BRICS. They want to expand it. And if you start getting these economic corridors going through, and they're getting cheap energy too, if it's going to India through Pakistan, if they're getting cheap energy and they're also collecting dues for transfer, there's really no interest in anybody going to war. Everybody's making money and expanding. And all of a sudden, this blows up. Okay, there's a terrorist attack. There's a horrible terrorist attack. But the overreaction seemed to be way off the scale compared to the damage done.
Yes and no. I mean, we must not underestimate just how deep also the animosities between Pakistan and India run. I mean, they both of them trace this back to the basically what also amounted to a genocidal campaign back in 48 when the states were separated, and the way that this still hurts both of these communities, which in a sense is also an outgrowth of course British actions, but by now has also taken a very deep root in both countries, and also how the narrative about the other one being the enemy is also important for both regimes, of course, and for both militaries, especially the Pakistani military, in order to justify their own power. So I rather read it in this kind of internal struggle. Although I would say I wouldn't be surprised if there was some Western involvement in all of this, because we know that especially Pakistan is the United States has a very deep hand in that, and the fact that Imran Khan is not the president of Pakistan anymore is due largely to US interventions, because it really didn't like that Khan was aggressively neutral in the Russia Ukraine question. That's what they called it. Under Secretary of State called it like, we cannot accept aggressive neutrality by Pakistan, and they helped the regime change. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but I also wouldn't underestimate the domestic animosities between the two states.
What exactly is aggressive neutrality? Damn it, I won't sell any weapons to
Aggressive,
anybody. What is that?
precisely. No, in any kind of conflict, when you have neutral parties, you usually have the stronger belligerent that will demand more strongly that everybody join them. Because the weaker belligerent has relatively to gain more of the neutrality of a third state. So it's usually the stronger one that then puts the squeeze on the neutrals in order to join them. And they would automatically frame not taking military action or not taking economic action as an unfriendly act toward them, right? It's just the natural thing to happen. So this is the US way of recasting, reframing, just the good preservation of self-interest of Pakistan as something that the US would not be willing to accept, because it thinks it has the power to squeeze out the neutrals. It's a natural thing to happen. Happens all the time.
I guess this is a George Bush, you're either with us or you're against us dogma.
Yeah. If you operate under a just war theory mindset, then there's no space for neutrality, and all kind of neutrality becomes support of the evil side. If you act under the mindset of Clausewitz, war is the continuation of politics by other means, then neutrality is the continuation of politics with the same means. Under Clausewitz, there's an understanding that certain states remain neutral, while others go to war, because it's just one of the choices. So especially the moralists, people who look at war in moral terms, they always tend to look down on neutrality and say like, oh, you're just supporting the bad side. It's a question of mindset.
Clausewitz was also a Russian officer. When Prussia got defeated, he joined the Russian army and then helped liberate it from Napoleon. So
Realists understand this, and moralists don't. That's why dogmatic people tend to just like shake their heads in disbelief when states say like, "Oh, I don't want this."
we are almost out of time. I know it runs fast. Unfortunately, I'm on the free version of Zoom. They don't take my Russian credit card, so it is what it is.
No worries. Thanks for the talk today, Stan.
Thank you for joining, Pascal. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you have any comments or questions for Pascal, write them in the commentary. I'll make sure he sees them. And I'll have this out on my Telegram channel and on YouTube. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pascal. Hope to see you again. This is very enjoyable.
See you next time. Thank you.
See you next time.